The snow came fast and without apology. By 4 in the afternoon, the mountain road into Silverpine, Colorado had become a thing of the past, a memory of asphalt buried under 14 inches of white and still climbing. The pine trees along Route 9 had stopped being trees. They were shapes now, heavy and anonymous, bending under the weight of something the Weather Channel had called a historic early-season event before the satellite signal cut out entirely. Daniel Hayes drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set. He wasn't scared of mountain roads. He'd lived in Silverpine for 6 years, long enough to know the switchbacks by feel, long enough to trust his truck on black ice, but the visibility had dropped to 30 feet in the last 20 minutes. And in the back seat, his daughter Emma had stopped talking, which was how he knew she was scared, because Emma almost never stopped talking. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice easy. "What?" "The lodge sign. We're almost there." She pressed her forehead to the cold glass. "Are we going to be stuck? Just for tonight?" He reached back and squeezed her knee without looking away from the road. "They have hot chocolate at the lodge." "You like hot chocolate. I like the kind with the little marshmallows." "I'll ask." The Silverpine Mountain Lodge appeared out of the white like something from an old postcard. A 3-story building of dark timber and stone, amber light pushing through every window, smoke rising thin and crooked from 2 chimneys. In any other context, it would have been beautiful. Right now, it just meant shelter, and Daniel pulled into the lot already crowded with the cars of other stranded travelers and cut the engine with a long exhale. Emma was already unbuckling. The lobby smelled like pine resin and wood smoke, and it was full of people in various states of travel-disrupted distress, a family with 3 children occupying the entire length of a sofa, a pair of older men in ski gear arguing over a folded map, a young couple sharing a phone and looking worried. Behind the front desk, a woman named Carol, her name tag said so, was fielding questions with the practiced calm of someone who had seen this exact situation before and was beginning to lose patience with it. Daniel waited his turn with Emma tucked under one arm. "Hayes," he said when he reached the counter. Carol's expression did something complicated. "Mr. Hayes." "Yes. I have to be honest with you. We've had 3 families check in today who had nowhere else to go, and we've had to make some accommodations." She lowered her voice. "We have 1 room left. Room 14. But there's another guest who also has a claim on it. A business booking from Voss International." Daniel looked at her steadily. "Someone's already in the room?" "Not yet. She arrived about 10 minutes ago." Carol glanced toward the small fireplace lounge at the far end of the lobby. "She's over there." He turned. The woman standing by the fireplace was not difficult to identify. She was the only person in the room who looked like she had not accepted the situation. Everyone else in the lodge had adopted the posture of the resigned shoulders down, phones out, small gestures of settling in. She stood straight. Her coat was charcoal cashmere, cut sharp at the collar, and she was on her phone with the focused expression of someone who was accustomed to making problems disappear through the correct application of words. She was, Daniel noticed in a purely observational way, exceptionally composed. The kind of composed that took effort to maintain. He crossed the lobby. She saw him coming and said something brief into the phone, then lowered it. Up close, her eyes were gray, the particular gray of early morning cloud cover, before the sun decides what kind of day it's going to be. "I'm guessing you're here about the room," he said. "I'm guessing you're here about the room," she replied. Her voice was measured, like she rationed it. "Daniel Hayes." He offered his hand. A half-second pause. Then she shook it. "Nora Caldwell." Emma looked up at her from hip height. "Hi. I'm Emma. Are you staying with us?" Nora Caldwell looked down at the 6-year-old with an expression that wasn't unkind exactly, but was clearly working out how to recalibrate. Apparently, yes. The negotiation at the front desk was brief and resulted in the only outcome available. They would share room 14. 2 adults, 1 child, a room with 1 queen bed and a narrow cot that Carol apologized for repeatedly. There was no other option. The roads were closed. The nearest town was 30 miles and unreachable. The lodge's other 11 rooms were occupied. Nora Caldwell accepted this the way she seemed to accept most things, with a tight mouth and the visible suppression of an objection she knew was pointless. Room 14 was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway that creaked underfoot. It was small, but not unpleasant dark wood paneling, a window that looked out onto the snow-buried forest, a cast-iron radiator in the corner that ticked quietly, a braided rug on the floor. The queen bed was against one wall. The cot was against the other. Between them, roughly 4 feet of complicated air. Emma immediately claimed the cot and started arranging her stuffed dinosaur on the pillow. "She's fine on the cot," Daniel told Nora. "I'll sleep on the floor." Nora set her bag on the chair by the window. "That's not necessary. I don't mind. I've slept on worse." She looked at him with the gray eyes. "We can split the bed. We're adults. Okay?" he said simply, because there was no good argument against it that didn't make the whole thing stranger than it needed to be. The radiator ticked. The wind drove snow against the window in long, hissing rushes. Emma said, "Dad, can we get the hot chocolate now?" Dinner, in the lodge's small dining room, was a communal affair born of necessity. The kitchen staff had made a large pot of beef stew and laid out bread and butter and canned fruit, and everyone ate at long tables pushed together, talking with the easy openness that strangers develop when they've been stranded together by weather. Nora Caldwell ate alone at the end of a table, a legal pad open beside her bowl, making notes in precise handwriting with a fountain pen that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Daniel watched her, not obviously, while Emma ate her stew and told him at length about her theory that the velociraptor in her favorite picture book was actually named Professor Claw and had a secret laboratory. "Dad, are you listening? Professor Claw has a laboratory. I'm listening. A secret one. Under a volcano. Obviously, under a volcano." Emma approved of this response. Across the room, Nora wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. After dinner, Daniel put Emma to bed on the cot she was asleep before he finished the 2nd page of the book she'd brought, and he sat for a while in the small chair by the window, watching the storm work. The trees were invisible now, just the glow of the lodge lights bouncing off the wall of white outside. The door opened quietly, and Nora came in. Still in her work clothes, her heels replaced with socks, which was the only sign she'd made any concession to the situation. "She's asleep," he said, low. Nora glanced at Emma's small shape on the cot, tucked under the lodge's wool blanket with the stuffed dinosaur. Something in her face shifted fractionally, almost imperceptibly. Then it settled back into neutral. "I have calls in the morning," she said. She sat on the edge of the bed, her side, as if the bed had already been divided by some mutual and unspoken agreement, and opened her laptop. "Okay," Daniel said. "I'll try to keep the light low. It won't bother me." Silence. The radiator ticked. He went back to looking at the storm. After a few minutes, she said, without looking up, "What do you do?" "Mechanic. I have a shop in Silver Pine." She processed this. "And you were coming back from Denver, picking up a parts order." He paused. "You?" "Board meeting in Aspen. My flight got redirected and then grounded." A small, controlled exhale. "My assistant rebooked 3 times before the storm made it irrelevant." "What kind of company?" "Defense and security technology. Software, mostly." He nodded. "Big company?" "Big enough." He didn't ask anything else. He wasn't performing indifference. He genuinely wasn't trying to impress her or make conversation for its own sake. He was just sitting with the storm and the ticking radiator and the sound of Emma's even breathing, and if Nora Caldwell wanted to work on her laptop until midnight, that was her business. It was this, the simple absence of effort, that made her look up. She studied him for a moment. the way she might study a document that didn't match the category she'd filed it in. "You're not curious about the company," she said. "I'll assume it's successful," he said. A pause. Then, carefully, something that might have been amusement at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. An approximation. She went back to her laptop. Daniel looked at the storm. Around 10 o'clock, the lodge's heating system failed. It wasn't a dramatic failure. The radiators simply went quiet, one by one, like instruments dropping out of an orchestra, until the only sound was the wind and the building's old bones settling in the cold. Within 20 minutes, the temperature in room 14 had dropped noticeably. Within 40, Daniel could see his breath. He put another blanket over Emma without waking her, then pulled on his flannel shirt and went to find the lodge's maintenance situation. Carol was in the basement with a flashlight and a look of contained panic. The boiler, an old system, cast iron, mid-century, had tripped a safety relay. Daniel had never worked on a boiler exactly, but he understood heating systems the way he understood most mechanical things. By listening to them, tracing the logic backward from the problem to its cause, he spent 40 minutes in the basement with Carol's flashlight and a wrench from the lodge's toolbox. When he came back up, the radiators were ticking again. Several guests had gathered in the lobby during the outage, wrapped in blankets and coats, and there was a small collective exhale when the heat returned. An older woman put her hand on Daniel's arm and said thank you with a sincerity that made him slightly uncomfortable. He nodded and went back upstairs. Nora was awake. She'd put on a cardigan over her blouse and was sitting up against the headboard with the laptop closed in her lap, which meant she hadn't been working, she'd just been waiting with it, the way some people hold things to have something to hold. "You fixed it," she said. "Relay switch. The system's old, but it's not complicated." She looked at his hands. There was grease under his thumbnail, which was part of the job. Her gaze didn't linger, but it didn't skip past either. "Were you cold?" he asked. "I was managing." He almost smiled. "Right." He checked Emma, again, still asleep, warm now, and sat back in the chair. The light was low, the lamp on the nightstand on its dimmest setting. Outside the window, the storm had reached a kind of steady, relentless state. No longer gusting, just pressing. "You didn't have to do that," Nora said. "Do what?" "Go down there." "It's not your job." He considered this. Someone needed to. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You do that a lot?" "Just handle things when I can, and when you can't, I deal with that too." He looked at the window. "My wife died when Emma was 2. You learn to handle things." The room was very quiet. He hadn't said it for effect. It wasn't a card he was playing. It was just a fact, offered simply, the way he offered most facts without performance, without the bracing that people sometimes did around heavy truths, as if the truth itself needed to be cushioned. Nora said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I'm sorry. Thank you. Was it? Cancer. Fast. 14 months from diagnosis." He paused. "Emma doesn't really remember her." I'm not sure which part is harder to carry." Nora's laptop slid to the side. She didn't pick it up. "I imagine," she said, and it was clear from her tone that she was not imagining it easily, "that you carry quite a lot. You learn how," he said. "It's just weight. Weight is manageable if you distribute it right." She looked at him with the gray eyes, and there was something in them now that hadn't been there at dinner. Not softness exactly, but something that had shifted away from the surface. "That's a very practical view of grief," she said. "I'm a practical person. Is Emma?" He smiled, and it reached his eyes. "Emma is a person who has given names to all the dinosaurs in her picture books and is currently developing a mythology around a velociraptor who lives under a volcano. So, no, Emma is many things, but practical is not at the top." Nora's mouth did the thing again, not quite a smile, but closer than before. "She sounds," Nora said carefully, "like she must be exhausting." Completely, he agreed. She's the best thing I've ever done. The storm showed no sign of stopping. By midnight, the temperature outside was 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the windows of room 14 had developed a fine lacework of frost at their edges. Emma slept with the trustworthy depth of children, utterly unconscious of weather or weight. The lamp on the nightstand threw a small, warm circle of light. Beyond it, most of the room was in shadow. They'd been talking for 2 hours. Daniel couldn't have said exactly how it happened. The conversation had moved the way conversations do when two people are tired, and the world outside is overwhelming, and there's nothing left to perform for. He'd told her about Silverpine, about the shop he'd opened with money borrowed from his father-in-law and paid back in 3 years, about the regular's old Gus Pemberton, who brought his 1,974 Bronco in every April like a ritual, the Nakamura family whose minivan he'd kept running through 4 Colorado winters, about Emma's kindergarten teacher who'd told him Emma had strong opinions about narrative structure and he still wasn't sure if that was a compliment. Nora had listened, fully, carefully, in the way that people who are very smart and very controlled listen, processing everything, giving little back. Then he'd asked, "Are you happy?" It was a direct question. He didn't dress it up. She'd gone quiet for so long that he thought she was going to redirect, to say something polished about professional fulfillment or market positioning. Instead, she looked down at her hands in her lap, the manicure precise, the knuckles slightly tight, and she said, "I don't know. When did you stop knowing?" Another long silence. "I'm not sure I ever knew. I think I decided very early that the question itself was a distraction." She paused. "You can achieve a great deal if you stop asking whether you're happy and simply focus on the next objective. That works for a while," he said. She looked at him sharply. "How would you know?" "Because most people I know who run very hard are running from something, not toward it." Her jaw tightened fractionally. Then it released. "That's presumptuous." "Maybe," he allowed. "Tell me I'm wrong." She didn't. The radiator ticked. The frost on the window crept another millimeter toward the glass's center. Nora pulled her cardigan tighter and said very quietly, "I built the company. From 40 people to 4,000. I made decisions that restructured entire divisions, that closed departments, that affected thousands of families." She stopped. "I was very good at it. I believe you. And I have everything that's supposed to follow from that. The apartment, the car, the recognition." She exhaled slowly. "And I sit in board meetings and I look out the window and I cannot tell you what I want for breakfast tomorrow." The room was very still. "That's not nothing," Daniel said. "It feels like nothing." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "But it's not nothing. It's a person who's been so focused on building that they forgot to live inside what they built." He paused. "That's fixable. Nothing is wrong with you." She looked at him with an expression that was, for the first time since they'd met, genuinely unguarded. Not soft, she was not a soft person, he suspected, not by nature. But open. The way a door is open when someone stops holding it shut. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I've been watching you for 8 hours, and I can tell you're not hollow. Hollow people don't get frustrated. You've been frustrated all evening, which means there's something in there that wants things to be different." She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I don't remember the last time I felt real." The words came out low, stripped of everything that usually attended them, no irony, no qualifier, no professional distance. Just the plain fact of it, offered into the room the way you'd offer something you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing its weight. Daniel didn't say anything immediately. He let the words be what they were. Then, what would real feel like? "I used to know." She looked at the window, at the frost and the dark beyond it. "I grew up in a small town in Vermont. My father was an accountant. My mother taught 4th grade. We had a garden in the backyard and we ate dinner together every night, and I wanted to leave so badly I could taste it." A pause. "I left. I built everything I'd decided I wanted, and somewhere in there She stopped. Lost the dinner table, he said. She turned and looked at him. Yeah, she said. The storm ended at dawn. Daniel knew it because the quality of the silence changed, the wind stopped, and what replaced it was a total, weighted quiet. The silence of a world muffled under 1.5 feet of snow. He was awake to hear it. He'd slept lightly, as he always did, tuned to Emma's breathing on the cot. He looked at the ceiling for a while. Beside him, a careful distance maintained through the night, the invisible line of 2 adults respecting the situation. Nora Caldwell was asleep. He could hear it in her breathing, even slower than he'd have expected from a woman who seemed to run at high tension even sitting still. Sleep had smoothed something in her face. She looked, he thought, like a person rather than a role. He got up quietly, checked Emma still out, and went to the window. The world was white and perfectly still. The pine trees had become sculptures. The mountains beyond the tree line stood clear and enormous against a sky that was turning the pale orange of early winter sunrise. It was extraordinary, the kind of extraordinary that Silverpine offered regularly and that he'd stopped taking for granted around year 3. He heard her shift behind him. It stopped, she said. Yeah, an hour or so ago. He didn't turn. Beautiful. A pause. Then, the sound of her sitting up, the creak of the mattress. He heard her cross to the window and stand beside him. They looked at the mountains together without speaking. It was a different silence than any they'd had the previous evening. Not the silence of awkwardness, not the silence of careful distance. Something that had been achieved, like a temperature reached. I said things last night, she said, that I don't typically. You don't have to. He turned to look at her. You don't owe me a retraction. She met his eyes. I wasn't going to retract. I was going to say I'm not in the habit of it. A pause. I don't usually trust people that easily. You didn't trust me easily, he said. It was midnight, and we'd been talking for 2 hours, and there was a blizzard. The barriers were lower than usual. That's not weakness. She looked at him for a moment. You have a very reasonable explanation for everything. I'm a mechanic. Reasonable explanations are the job. Something crossed her face, not quite the full smile yet, but its near neighbor, its immediate predecessor. Emma stirred on the cot, turned over, and opened her eyes with the instantaneous alertness of a child. She looked at the 2 adults standing at the window and said, without preamble, Is there pancakes? The roads into Silverpine didn't open until the following afternoon. That left them with a day and a half in which the lodge operated as a small, self-contained world. Guests eating together, playing cards in the lounge, children building elaborate snow constructions in the parking lot. Daniel helped stack wood for the fireplaces. He fixed a stuck window latch on the 3rd floor that had been bothering a retired couple from Kansas for 2 days. He taught Emma the rules of cribbage using a set he found in the game room, then played 3 rounds and let her win one of them legitimately. Nora watched. She had her laptop open, but the work-to-watching ratio shifted as the morning went on. By noon, she'd closed the laptop. By 1 o'clock, she was sitting across from Emma at the game room table, learning cribbage. 15-2, 15-4. Emma said, with the authority of a 6-year-old who has just learned a rule and intends to enforce it absolutely. I see it, Nora said. She moved her peg on the board with care, the way she did most things precisely. Daniel, watching from the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, said nothing. What he noticed, though, was the way Nora's shoulders sat. They were lower than they'd been in the lobby yesterday. The cashmere coat had been replaced with a Lodge-borrowed cable-knit sweater in oatmeal because her professional wardrobe had not accounted for extended snowbound leisure. She looked, in that borrowed sweater, like someone playing a character she hadn't played in years and finding it fit better than expected. He brought her the coffee. She took it without making it a moment. That was the thing about her. She didn't perform gratitude the way people did when they were trying to seem relatable. She just took the coffee and said thank you and meant it. and there was something in the plainness of it that was more affecting than elaborate thanks would have been. "She's beating you," he said. Aggressively and without mercy, Nora agreed. "I get that from the dinosaur mythology," Daniel said. Emma, not looking up from her cards. "Professor Claw is very competitive." That evening, after dinner beef stew again, but no one complained. They sat by the lobby fireplace while Emma drew in her sketchbook and Daniel and Nora drank the lodge's mediocre wine and talked. It was different from the night before. The urgency was gone. The weight of the storm's peak had passed, and what was left was something quieter and steadier. She told him about Vermont, about the garden her mother kept tomatoes, basil, a struggling fig tree that her father talked to when he thought no one was watching, about leaving for Boston at 18 with a scholarship and a duffel bag and the absolute conviction that everything she needed was ahead of her. "Were you right?" he asked. "About some of it," she said. "Wrong about most of it." She looked at the fire. "I thought success would feel like a rival, like a destination." She paused. "It feels like a treadmill that gets faster. Why not step off?" "Because I built the treadmill." She said it without self-pity, just observation. "And because I'm not sure I know how to not be the person who runs it." "You've been off it for 2 days. She looked at him, under duress. "Still off it." She was quiet for a moment. "I called my COO this afternoon and told him to handle the Aspen follow-up. First time I've handed off something that significant in." She thought about it. "I'm not sure." "A long time. How did it feel?" "Terrifying." A pause. "And then fine. And then I forgot to keep being terrified because Emma wanted to play another round of cribbage." He smiled. "She has that effect. She's remarkable," Nora said, and it was unguarded, no qualification around it. "She's so entirely herself." "You've done something very right." He looked at Emma, who was drawing a volcano with great concentration. "She did most of it. She came out like that." "No. She came out with potential. You shaped the rest." Nora looked at him directly. "You should know that." He held the look for a moment. Then he looked back at the fire. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." The road crews opened Route 9 at 2 in the afternoon the next day. Within an hour, the lodge had released half its stranded guests into the cautious freedom of plowed roads. The parking lot, which had been a static arrangement of snow-covered shapes for nearly 2 days, became briefly chaotic, with engines starting and luggage being loaded, and the sounds of people returning to their regular trajectories. Nora's car service had reached the lodge by 3. Daniel's truck, checked and reliable, was ready when he needed it. They stood in the lobby with Emma between them, bundled back into her coat, her stuffed dinosaur, now named Professor Claw officially, per Emma's announcement that morning, tucked under her arm. "Well," Nora said. "Well," Daniel agreed. Emma looked between them. "Are we having pancakes first?" Both adults looked at her. "There's a diner," Daniel said. He looked at Nora. "Half-mile down into town. They do them properly." Nora looked at him for a moment. Her car service driver was waiting. Her schedule, reconstructed by her assistant in hourly increments, existed on a phone in her coat pocket. "Half a mile," she said. 10 minutes. She looked out the lodge doors at the snow-bright afternoon. Then she looked at Emma, who was watching her with the uncomplicated directness of a 6-year-old who simply expected things to be decided and gotten on with. "All right," Nora said. The diner was called Sullivan's, and it had been in Silverpine for 34 years, and it was the kind of place that had not changed its menu, or its booths, or its ceramic mug collection in at least 20 of those years. Which was exactly what made it trustworthy. They took a booth by the window. Outside, the town of Silverpine moved slowly back into its routines, a plow working down Main Street, a man shoveling his shop entrance, 2 children with a sled making optimistic calculations about a hill. Emma ordered pancakes with the specificity of someone who had given the matter serious, prior consideration. The waitress, whose name tag said BECK, and who had clearly worked there long enough to have strong opinions about everything, wrote it down, and then looked at Nora. "What'll you have, hun?" Nora looked at the menu. Daniel watched her face go through something a small, private negotiation. "Pancakes," she said. "Same as her." Becca wrote it down without comment and left. Emma approved. Daniel said nothing, but something in him settled. The pancakes came with butter and real maple syrup in a small ceramic pitcher, and Nora Caldwell ate them at a booth in a small-town diner in Colorado, with the expression of someone who had not eaten pancakes, not properly, not without a reason, not for the pleasure of it, in a very long time. "Good?" he asked. "Stop watching me enjoy food," she said, "but without heat. Can't help it." She pointed at him with her fork. "Eat your own." Emma thought this was very funny. After breakfast, they walked. There wasn't a plan. Emma led, because Emma always led. And she led them down Main Street and through the small park where the snow lay in smooth, unbroken sheets between the benches, and then along the side road where an antique shop displayed old things in a frost-edged window. Emma stopped to press her face to the glass and announce her opinions about a rocking horse. Nora stopped beside her and looked in at the things arranged on velvet and rough wood, a brass compass, a stack of books with faded spines, a wooden box with a latch. She pointed to the compass. "My grandfather had one like that," she said. "He gave it to me when I was 8, said I was going to travel far." She paused. "I did. I just never figured out how to use a compass." "Knowing where you are," Daniel said. "Not where you're going." She looked at him sidelong. "That's the function of a compass," he said. "Not destination, current position." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're occasionally insufferable, you know. I've been told." "By whom?" "Emma. Mostly Emma." Emma, hearing her name, turned from the window. "What?" "Nothing," both adults said, simultaneously, and Emma accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who'd heard this before and knew not to push it. They ended up sitting on a bench in the park with cups of coffee from the bakery 2 doors down, watching Emma negotiate with the geometry of building a snow animal that she insisted was a triceratops, but which looked like a lumpy triangle from any angle. The afternoon light was the particular gold of Colorado winter, low-angled, warm-toned, generous. It turned the snow on the mountains amber at their edges. Nora had her hands wrapped around the cup and her legs crossed at the ankle, and she was watching Emma with the expression of someone who'd been reminded of a word they'd forgotten. "I had a plan," she said. "Not to him exactly, more to the air, to the afternoon. From the time I was 16, I had a plan, and the plan worked, and I executed it well, and every milestone I hit just became the new baseline for the next one." She paused. "I scheduled a therapy appointment 3 years ago and then rescheduled it 9 times before I just stopped scheduling it." "That's not unusual," he said. "What?" "Avoiding therapy. Having a plan that gets you where you aimed, and then realizing the aiming was the problem." She looked at him. "What was your plan?" He thought about it. "Work on cars. Raise Emma. Keep the people I love close." A pause. "The third one didn't work out the way I wanted, but the first 2 are going okay. That's a very small plan. It's a very achievable one." She shook her head slowly. "I couldn't have lived like that. I would have been terrified of the smallness. And now?" She looked at the triceratops that Emma was patting into existence with focused, unself-conscious effort. "Now I think I mistook scale for meaning." Her voice was even, no drama in it. "A 4,000-person company isn't more meaningful than a diner that's been here 34 years. It's just louder." "Both can be meaningful," he said. "Yes, but only one of them requires you to stop being a person to run it." She turned to look at him directly. "I stopped being a person, Daniel, somewhere around year 6 or 7. I stopped having preferences about things that weren't strategically relevant. I stopped calling people back unless there was an agenda item." She stopped. "I didn't notice until I was sitting in a blizzard telling a stranger that I can't decide what I want for breakfast." The word stranger sat between them for a second. He let it. "You knew what you wanted for breakfast this morning," he said. She looked at him. "I know. That's not nothing. You said that yesterday." Still true. She looked back at Emma, who had given up on the Triceratops and was now constructing what appeared to be a simple mound, but with great conviction. "I need to change things," Nora said. Not to him, exactly. Not to herself, exactly. Just the fact of it, stated plainly. "What things? I don't know yet," she exhaled. That might be the most honest sentence I've said in years. By 4 o'clock, the afternoon light was already going. They'd walked back to the lodge, collected the bags that had been left in the lobby, stood in the parking lot in the cold blue of late winter afternoon, with the mountains turning gray behind them. Emma was holding Professor Claw and leaning against Daniel's leg with the comfortable weight of a child who has had a full day and is now operating on reserves. Nora's car was there. The driver had the engine running. She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. "You're going back to Denver," she said. "Yeah. Emma's got school on Monday." "Right." She looked at Emma. "Professor Claw goes to school too?" Emma considered this seriously. "He observes." "Of course." Nora crouched down slightly, a small, deliberate gesture so she was closer to Emma's level. "It was very nice to meet you, Emma." Emma nodded with the gravity of a child who accepts this as appropriate. "You should come visit us sometime. Dad makes really good spaghetti." Nora glanced up at Daniel, who was keeping his expression neutral with some effort. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. She stood. She and Daniel looked at each other for a moment, the kind of moment that has a lot in it and knows better than to say all of it. "You're not happy," he said. "Not accusatory, just a fact. I know. You built everything." A pause. "Except a life." Her jaw tightened. Not with anger, with the effort of not looking away. "That's a very direct thing to say. I'm a practical person." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face was working through several things at once. He could see it. The way you can see gears moving when the housing is off, all of it visible. And then her eyes went bright, just briefly, the way eyes do when something moves behind them. "I know," she said. "I know." She reached into her coat pocket and took out a card, clean, heavyweight, embossed. She held it out. He took it. "In case Emma needs a cribbage opponent," she said. "She cheats less convincingly than I initially thought." He smiled. "She absolutely does not cheat. She very absolutely does." Nora looked at him one more time, steady, gray, open, in the way she'd been learning to be open across 2 days and a blizzard and maple syrup from a ceramic pitcher. "Thank you. For the boiler. For the conversation. For," she stopped, "for asking if I was okay." He nodded. She got in the car. He watched it pull out of the lot and turn onto the road and disappear behind the tree line. And then it was just the mountains and the quiet and Emma's hand finding his without looking. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah, I like her." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in January, Nora Caldwell drove into Silverpine, Colorado, in a rented car with no itinerary and no assistant-confirmed schedule. She had, in the preceding 6 weeks, done several things that would have been inconceivable to the version of herself that had stood in the Silverpine Mountain Lodge lobby in a cashmere coat, arguing about a room. She had told her board she was taking a month's leave. The conversation had been brief and contained a quality of finality that made clear she was not asking. She had promoted her COO to interim CEO. She had scheduled and kept 2 appointments. She had called her mother in Vermont for the first time in what turned out to be a year and 4 months, and they had talked for an hour and a half about nothing in particular, and it had been, she realized afterward, one of the better hours she'd had in a very long time. She had bought a compass. Not the one from Sullivan's antique shop, though she'd thought about it. A clean, new one. She'd left it on her desk and hadn't used it for navigation, but she'd picked it up occasionally, in idle moments, and turned it until the needle settled. There was something grounding about the certainty of it. The needle always knew. Daniel's shop, Hayes Auto, on a side street 2 blocks off Main was identifiable by the hand-lettered sign above the bay doors, which were open despite the cold, and by the sound of a radio playing something countryish from inside, and by the sight of a pair of boots sticking out from under a 1,987 pickup truck in the first bay. Nora parked and got out. "Hayes Auto?" she called. The boots shifted. A mechanic's trolley rolled out, and Daniel Hayes looked up at her from the concrete floor with grease on his hands and an expression that moved through surprise to something quieter and more certain. He stood up. "Nora Caldwell," he said. "I was in the area," she said. He looked at her. "You drove 3 hours from Denver to be in the area. I wanted pancakes." She paused. "And I called first. Emma said to come." He blinked. "Emma has your number memorized, apparently, and knew where to find your old phone in the kitchen drawer." Nora's mouth did the thing, the near smile, the predecessor, and then, finally, without restraint, it arrived. A real one. It changed her face the way sun changes a room. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. "She called me last Tuesday and told me you'd made spaghetti, and she wanted me to have some. I had to explain that spaghetti doesn't transport well." Daniel stared at her. "I'm going to have a talk with her about phone use. Please don't." It was the best call I've had in years. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her at the way she stood, which was different from how she'd stood in the lodge lobby. Same posture, same composure, but something behind the eyes had shifted. The window was open. "Are you?" he started. "Better," she said. "Not fixed. I'm not standing here with everything sorted." She met his eyes. "But I'm here because I want to be here, which is a thing I haven't been able to say about most places in a long time." He wiped his hands on the shop cloth, looked at her for another moment. Then, without making it a production, "Sullivan's is still open," he said. "I know. I drove past it. Emma gets out of school at 3. "I know that too." She paused. "She told me." He nodded slowly. "She talks a lot. She really does." Nora looked at him steadily, the gray eyes clear and direct. "She told me her dad makes faces when he's trying not to smile. That I should watch for it." He looked away briefly. "There it is," Nora said. He looked back at her and smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile of the lodge lobby, a real one. The kind that gets into the corners of the eyes and doesn't apologize for being there. "Come on," he said. "I'll close up." They walked to Sullivan's the same way they'd walked in the snow 6 weeks ago. Emma's usual path, the park and the side road and the window of the antique shop. The compass was still in the display. Neither of them pointed it out. Neither of them needed to. At the booth by the window, Becca appeared with her pad and her complete absence of sentimentality. "What'll it be?" Nora looked at the menu for exactly 2 seconds. "Pancakes," she said. Becca wrote it down. "Same as before?" Nora looked up. "You remember?" Becca shrugged. "Small town. You were with the guy who fixed the Kowalski family's van for free last winter." She glanced at Daniel. "People remember that." She left. Nora looked at him. "You fixed someone's van for free?" Their eldest kid needed surgery. They were tight on money. He looked out the window. "It's a small town." She studied him for a moment, the profile, the hands flat on the table, the way he looked at the town he lived in and saw it exactly, clearly, without either romance or disdain. She thought about the compass on her desk and the needle that always knew. "I told my board I'm restructuring my role," she said. "Less operational, more strategic. I'm hiring a permanent CEO." She paused. "I'm going to advise and consult, but I'm not going to run the treadmill anymore." "How did they take it?" "Poorly, then fine." She paused. "I've learned that most things are poorly, then fine. Takes practice." "You've had practice. A lot of it," he agreed. The coffee arrived. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Outside, the last light of the January afternoon was going amber over the snow on the mountains, and Silverpine's Main Street moved at its unhurried pace, and somewhere across town a 6-year-old was probably explaining the mythology of Professor Claw to a classroom that had learned to take it in stride. "I don't know where this goes," Nora said. "Neither do I." He looked at her. "But that's what's honest, yes." She held his gaze. "I think I'd like to find out, though." "If that's... yeah," he said. "Just that." The pancakes came. They ate them slowly, without agenda, while the light outside went the deep blue of early winter evening, and the town settled into itself and the mountains stood enormous and clear and permanent at the edge of the sky. At some point she said, "Emma was right about the spaghetti, by the way. I could taste it in her description. She's very precise in her food opinions. Frighteningly so." She paused. "I'd like to try it. If the offer still stands." He looked at her across the table, across the coffee and the maple syrup and the 6 weeks of quiet distance, and the blizzard and the midnight conversation and the single whispered sentence that had changed the weight of things. "It stands," he said, and outside the snow held still on the mountains, and the compass needle settled, and the evening was warm enough.